Welcome to Nifty 50 Photographers. Now, one of the questions I get asked most often is which lens should I buy? And in this video, I'm going to talk to you about landscape photography and possibly what your purchase should be for your next lens. Actually, if you watch to the end, you might get a bit of a surprise as to which one I would recommend. Might actually save you some money. When you think about landscape photography, I think the focal length that people often think they need is something wider. So the obvious choice would be to go for a wide-angle lens or an ultra-wide. Now, I possess both, but I have to say my ultra-wide I hardly ever use for landscape. I really keep it more for my property work because I'm working in small rooms, perhaps an ensuite bathroom or something like that. So the one I would normally use is this. It's a 16 to 35. Now, it's a great lens for landscape photography and it really helps you out in those situations where you're close up to a big mountain or something, or a mountain range, and you want to get the whole range in. However, the difficulty with it, and I think this is even harder for beginners, is your composition. You really have to think very carefully about your composition, because the problem with a wide-angle lens is the very thing you bought it for gets so much of the scene in, and that often means you've got a lot of foreground in the scene. Now, if you look at this photograph here that I tried to take of Ribble Head Viaduct at sunrise, you'll see in the foreground there's a massive amount of grass, and the real feature of the photo is perhaps the sun rising, but also the viaduct, the structure itself, and it's kind of lost because it's become so small. Photographers always talk about making their pictures more interesting, particularly for landscapes, by adding in foreground interest. And that's what this photo was lacking. Now, if I move on to these photographs of Tobermory, so this is Tobermory Harbour, and in this first photograph I've been conscious of the fact that I needed to add in some foreground interest. I wanted to get a wide angle view of that harbour with all those pretty coloured houses, and I found a scene from opposite where there was these rusty old painted up anchors that were embedded in the concrete, and I thought they would make some great foreground interest. This was my first attempt. Frankly, I haven't got quite close enough to the foreground. So that's one of the things you need to do if you're using these wide angle lenses, is probably point your camera down a little bit, but also you need to have your foreground really close in the scene. The other thing is you've got to keep the connection to the background, because really the background is probably your main subject. You know, it's the mountain, or in this case it's the coloured houses of the harbour. So in this second attempt I moved a few feet further forward, got the anchors a bit closer, and the whole thing has worked much better. However, one of the things we often forget when we're trying to take these wide angle shots is you don't have to do it in one shot. You know, with things like Lightroom now, it's so easy to take a panorama, stitch it all together and end up with a great photo, and then you don't have to worry so much about having a super wide angle lens. Here's one I took of Tobermory Harbour again, and it's worked really well by shooting this as a panorama instead of trying to cram everything into one photo. Full disclosure, actually this is shot with a very wide angle lens because I wanted to get that kind of a scene, but it's often a way I get myself out of trouble if I'm trying to photograph something that I can't get in one shot because my lens isn't wide enough. So it's a good solution and it can create a really interesting photo. So that's wide angle lenses. So what about the other end of the scale? Telephoto lenses. Well, a lens that I commonly use is this, a 70 to 200. Now, I didn't particularly buy this for landscapes. I bought it for doing things like portraits, but I knew it would come in handy for landscapes and for sports and so on. Problem with it is it's big and it's pretty heavy as well, actually. So I also ended up buying a second version. This is a 24 to 240, which I use for travel. Beauty of taking landscapes with a long lens is it really allows you to pick up some detail. Here's a shot of Rydal water. Now, this is a typical shot you might get from your kit lens. It's shot at around 50mm, and actually not that interesting. It's quite nice. There's a nice reflection, some autumn colours there, but there's also a lovely little tree on an island, and this is probably one of the more photographed trees in the Lake District. And this is it shot now with a telephoto lens, so I'm actually at about 80mm for this shot. Probably just get close to it with your kit lens if you've got a crop sensor and get a similar image. But I then went much tighter and ended up with this shot. Now this is shot at 160mm, so I've gone in pretty close, and it's allowed me to really focus in on the detail, and it's allowed me to link the foreground, the middle ground and the background, which is an important compositional tool. If you don't know how to do that, take a look at this video, which I'll link to up here. And it's that opportunity to take those detail shots, to look around your scene and find other compositions, that makes a telephoto lens a really interesting lens to use for your landscape photography. You know, it is most likely that every other photographer who goes to that lovely vista you've seen will take that wide angle shot, but not many of them will find a close-up detail that's the same as yours, so it does give you the chance to create something unique. So let's finally talk about mid-range lenses, something like a 24-70. You know, when you bought your camera, you probably got a kit lens. If it was a crop sensor camera, maybe something like a 20-60, something in that range. If it's a full frame, perhaps a 24-70 or a 24-105. Now what can you do with that? Well, I've had the benefit of taking digital landscape photos and storing them all in the same catalogue for getting on for 10 years. So I just analysed how many shots I'd taken, of the best shots I'd taken in the landscapes, what lenses had I used, and I was quite surprised to find the results. What I found was that more than 50% of the photos I'd taken had been with my 24-70 lens. And some of my best results are undoubtedly with that lens. And the next most used lens was my telephoto. I take nearly 25% with that. And finally, the wide angle ones actually was around 10-11%. It's the one I use the least often. Maybe it's because I don't get the best results with that, but I think it's really because it's very challenging to create those compositions with it. So if you're a beginner, I would really recommend that you really hone your craft using that kit lens. And then maybe the next thing to do is move on to a telephoto. You'll get a lot more use out of a telephoto too. It's good for sports, it's good for portraits and things like that as well. Whereas the wide angle really is a bit more limited in its application. It's good for those big scenes you want to get. It's good for doing things like interiors of building and architecture as well. So it depends a little bit where your interest lies. But you might not need to buy anything. You get some great results with your kit lens. Here's a few examples I've taken with my 24-70. I hope that's helped to clarify your decision. If you want to know more about focal length, then I'll link to a video up here, Understanding Focal Length with Your Camera. That might be the thing you want to watch next. In the meantime, go out and take some lovely landscape photos, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.